It's okay.
Yes.
So, dear colleagues and participants, we are very pleased to co-organize with IFRA-Nigeria, one of the French institutes for research in Africa, this second webinar, which is part of the partnership set up by the Gender Institute with the French research units abroad. As members of the Scientific Council of the Gender Institute, Delphine Lacombe, who will be there in a few minutes, and I work together to develop this partnership. And we are very pleased to welcome Estelle Ferrares, who is the director of the Gender Institute, in this webinar today. So thank you, Estelle, for your presence. I will briefly present the Gender Institute. It is a scientific program group which was created almost 10 years ago. In France, its aim is to promote and disseminate research on gender in all its diversity, in particular for young researchers, and to support their scientific recognition. More recently, the Institute has decided to strengthen its international dimension by setting up a network of correspondents. We wanted to rely on the network of French research units abroad and on their very rich connection with colleagues in the countries where they are based. The Institute of Research for Development is also part of this dynamic. So the objective is to make regional meetings online that can take two different forms. First, it can be the place to discuss about the main political issues on gender, taking into account the very contrasting political context around common theme. That was the formula chosen for our first webinar last spring with the CEFRES, the French Research Center for Humanities and Social Sciences, and the CEMCA, the Center for Mexican and Central American Studies. We had a webinar about the relationships between gender studies, political conflict, and academic freedom. We wanted to give some elements to understand the actuality of this question in very different contexts, and we have discussed the current developments of the conservative backlash against gender studies, the forms of pressure and censorship against them, in Hungary with Andrea Peto, in Cameroon with Patrick Awando, and in Mexico with Veronica Rodriguez Cabrera. The second formula that we are inaugurating today is to focus not on a theme, but on a specific country to highlight and discuss the gender studies that are developed there and which remain little or less known in France or in the French-speaking era. As Elodie Appart pointed out in a recent call for papers on Nigerian studies in France, the most populous country in Africa, which is also the continent's leading economic power, remains paradoxically little invested in French research. And she also underlines that there is a real delay compared to English-speaking countries and Northern Europe, while the need for analysis is real. So we hope that this webinar will serve to put forward the gender studies developed in Nigeria and discussing the history, institutionalization, and perspective for gender studies in Nigeria will certainly open interesting debates and comparisons. To conclude this brief presentation, I would like to sincerely thank our colleagues from IFRA-Nigeria. First, its director, Vincent Hiribarren, who was immediately interested and motivated to set up joint activities. And of course, Sara, Panata, who is postdoctoral student at Social History Center in Aubervilliers, and who is also affiliated to IFRA-Nigeria and IMAF, the African Wars Institute. Sara was really the main architect of this webinar. Her in-depth knowledge of the field of gender studies in Nigeria made it possible to define a very rich program. Also, a big thanks to our speakers and discussants that we are delighted to hear today, but I will let Sara present them in a few minutes. And last but not least, I want to thank Juliette for precious help for this, the logistical organization and the communication around this event. So now I leave the floor to Vincent Hiribarren. Thank you.
Thank you for your kind words. It's an honor today to do this cooperation with the Institut du Genre in France. I think it's a very important topic for IFRA. because since its creation, actually in 1990, IFRA-Nigeria has been cooperating with our colleagues from just upstairs here in the Institute of African Studies. Then we WARDOC. I'm sure Dr. Panata and the other speakers will tell you more about WARDOC just across the car park, actually just here. And I must say it's a pleasure to talk to you today. Let me just introduce you briefly, tell you what IFRA is about in a few words, and after I tell you why I was that interested in the whole topic. IFRA is a French research institute based at the University of Ibadan, and University of Ibadan is a central place to understand women's studies and gender studies in Nigeria. And I think this is something very important to remember. We collaborate with Nigerian researchers and many researchers from West Africa, obviously, and I'd be happy to hear about your research if you want to share it with us, obviously. We've been here since 1990, and I hope we're going to have more and more collaborations with colleagues working on themes linked with gender, obviously. Myself, I'm particularly interested in it because actually I created a history course on a history module on the history of Nigeria a few years ago, and I noticed actually that nothing was written on Nigerian women before the 1980s. There wasn't much. And one of the first people who wrote something about it is Bolanle Awe, who used to be here in the Institute of African Studies. I saw someone in the chat was interested in this book. The book is called Nigerian Women, a Historical Perspective, edited by Bolanle Awe. That's the name of the book. Why is it important? Because we've got it here in our little center for Nigeria with many other books, and it's a very important, work on the history of women. And basically what happened is that in the 1980s, I noticed actually more and more people were interested in the history of women, and little by little we moved on with Bolanle, with Ninamba, and Ife Majume towards a history of gender at the end of the 1980s and during the 1990s. And that's something which I was very interested in, because we've got some very good books from WARDOC, for example, such as this one, with two authors who are here today with us, something which was something central to a lot of teaching in Anglophone universities, so in the US, in the UK as well. The idea is developed by Oyeronke Oyewumi about the invention of women. So basically, it's like a classical way of teaching in general. That's why I was very interested in myself, because it was part of the kind of debates which were taught in universities. I won't say much more than that, because otherwise I would, I'm not an expert at all. I guess the expert is coming now. Dr. Panata can tell us a bit more. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? And thank you, Marième and Vincent. I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar today, and I thank you all for joining us. A special thanks to the three speakers of today and the two discussants. I'm going to introduce you later in a few minutes, and as well as to the French Gender Institute and IFRA-Nigeria for the organization of the seminar. My name is Sara Panata, and I'm going to be the moderator this afternoon. I'm a postdoctoral student at the Center for Social History in Paris, affiliated to IFRA-Nigeria and IMAF in Paris. I'm a historian on my side and specialized in modern history of Nigeria and women and gender history. So when the French Institute contacted IFRA-Nigeria to organize this seminar on gender studies, we discussed a lot on the topic of this seminar with different Nigerian colleagues. And at the end, we choose to focus our discussion on a state of the art of women and gender studies in the country. Nigeria was a pioneer African country in women's studies. The first works on women history were published in the 70s, 80s. So Mutiat, Oladejo, the first speakers, will talk more about that. So it seemed very relevant to us 50 years after these first works to organize a discussion around the history of these 5 decades of research on women and later gender studies. The seminar would like not only to explore the history of the discipline, but also the growth and the institutionalization of gender studies, as well as the new perspective and ongoing debates in research on women and gender studies in Nigeria. The idea is to give you an overview at the same time of the main topic studied in gender studies and the changes through time, of some institutions linked to gender studies in the country. And finally, the idea is also to discuss issues linked to the discipline of gender studies in Nigeria. For this reason, we invited today to speak 3 speakers and researchers involved in various fields of gender studies in Nigeria and based in Nigeria, namely in the University of Ibadan. This university, that is the first university in Nigeria, established in 1948, was an important center for the first works on women's studies in the 70s and 80s, as Vincent was saying. Namely, the Department of History of the university was extremely active in the writing of women's history with scholars like Bolaleawe, Larry Denzer, or Ninamba. And also the first center of archives for women and gender studies in the country was founded in the Institute of African Studies, that is based in the University of Ibadan in the 80s, and it is called the Women's Research and Documentation Center. We are going to talk about it later. And also in the Institute of African Studies, there is today a gender studies program to form a new generation of scholars in women and gender studies. So the 3 speakers of today are linked to this very important academic institution in the country. Let me just move on to introduce to you our 3 speakers and the 2 discussants. We're going to talk in the order which I introduced them to you. So our first speaker is Dr. Mutiat Oladejo. She is an historian and a lecturer in the Department of History in the University of Ibadan. She is the author of Ibadan Market, Women and Politics, published in 2015, of The Women Went Radical, Petition Writings and Colonial State in Southwestern Nigeria, and of A History of Textiles and Fashion in the 20th Century Yoruba World, just published in February 2022. In her research, Dr. Oladejo examines the cross-cutting themes in African history and gender studies. Today, she will present a paper on women's history and historiography in Nigeria. This paper will give us a historical overview on gender studies in the country, discussing the trends of research on this field. Our second speaker is Adebayo Adedeji. Adebayo Adedeji is a PhD student in the Department of Peace, Security and Humanitarian Studies at the University of Ibadan, and also a student of the Gender Studies program. He is also a postgraduate teaching and research assistant attached to the University of Ibadan Research Foundation and a junior research fellow at IFRA-Nigeria. His area of research interest includes gender and development, women's political representation, as well as intra-party conflicts in the country. His today's presentation of today, is on the growth and institutionalization context of semi-autonomous gender studies center in Nigeria. Our last speaker is Dr. Sharon Omotoso. Sharon Omotoso is a feminist philosopher. She holds a PhD in philosophy with focus on media and gender studies. Currently a senior research fellow at the Institute of African Studies, she is the coordinator of the Women's Research and Documentation Center. She serves on the editorial boards of Feminist Africa and Journal Communication, Culture and Critique. She combines research, advocacy and activisms, hosting seminars and workshops on topics related to women, sexual violence, media education, ethics, and political communication. Sharon Omotoso co-edited Political Communication in Africa, published in 2017, and edited the book Women's Political Communication in Africa in 2020. Today, she will present a paper titled Gender Studies in Nigeria, Looking Back, Going Forward. After the presentation, Dr. Hugon and Dr. Seun Olutayo will discuss the 3 papers. Dr. Hugon is a senior lecturer at Paris 1, Pantheon-Sorbonne University. She specialized in modern social history of Ghana and women and gender history. Dr. Seun Olutayo is a senior lecturer at the Institute of African Studies. She is a political scientist specialized in gender studies. She is the current coordinator of the Gender Studies program. So before starting, I also want to introduce to you Juliette Reflé, who is the research project manager at IFRA-Nigeria. First of all, I would like to thank her for helping us organizing the seminar. And Juliette will also be taking your question today. So if you keep them coming through using the chat function, Juliette will collect your question and put them to our speakers or discussants after the presentation and the response. And you can also ask a question directly to the speakers and the discussants at the end of the session. In this case, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom to notify Juliette that you would like to speak. The format will be that each of our speakers will speak for no more than 20 minutes. Our discussants will speak for 15 minutes each, and then we will just open it up to a broad discussion. So we think there should be about 45 minutes at the end for your questions. So I just would like also to remind you that this session is recorded. All right, so let's start with Dr. Oladejo.
Thank you, Sara. It's good to be here. We've been on this 2 months back, discussed extensively on this, and I'm happy that we are here today to talk about this. So the title of my presentation is Women's History and Historiography in Nigeria. So I'm going to be speaking to some of the things I have on my slides, and I'm going to be more like explaining some of the points I highlighted on the slides. So, okay. So Sara, how are you?
I'm very fine, thank you.
Okay.
We cannot
I'm waiting for the slides to be shared.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bear with us a second, sorry about that. Just trying to put the presentation here. Is it this one?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm going to share the screen, okay. There you go. And share screen. And so I'm going to share this one. Can you see our screen? Is that okay? Yes?
Yes.
Can you see the PowerPoint? Okay,
yeah.
Please, Doctor, please carry on. Please, and to move the slides, you can do that. Hang on. You can carry on, click on the next one here. Okay. Please go. Please go.
So good day, everyone. The title of my presentation is Women's History and Historiography in Nigeria. Generally, the idea of writing women's history that are based on certain issues or factors or circumstances. And then I asked the question, why women's history? Number one, writing women's history came as a reactionary act to counter male-dominated ideas of writing African history. I mean, in the 1950s and 60s, when Nigerians were trying to write African history, even writing African history itself was reactionary to how Europeans perceived Africa. And so that was the response to African history. But subsequently, by the 1980s, the urge to write about women came reactionary to the male-centered ideas about writing African history. Not only in content of the what is written about Africa in itself, but also the actors involved in it. Because it was realized that few women were actually historians as at the 1970s and 80s, And then few issues are even, they only make a kind of little reference to women in some of the writings about African history. So first, the writing of women's history has been reactionary initially. Then it also came as a form of advocacy. Advocacy in the sense that as at the 1970s, especially the United Nations Decade on Women, it became obvious globally that there is a need to do more about projecting women in all spheres. And so at this point in time, it beckoned, I mean, it became obvious that there was the need to bring writing women into history itself in Nigeria. And so that led to the first panel on women's history at the 1986 Historical Society of Nigeria conference. That conference was held, I've forgotten the location specifically, but at that conference, female historians like Nina Mba, Larry Denza, the panel was created to actually discuss the challenges of teaching and researching women's history in Nigerian universities. There and then a resolution was made at that panel to see to the mainstreaming of gender-based courses in the Department of Histories of universities. And subsequently, that manifested as women and development courses were taught in master's classes and generally postgraduate classes of Nigerian universities. Then there and then a network of women was formed to take interest in researching women's history in Africa. Then another reason why women's history came into being was the dearth of knowledge on itself, because there were little books, journals, references that could serve as a source of knowledge on women generally in Nigeria and in Africa. So in order to contribute to knowledge on women's role in the society, women's history came into being. Then the fourth, like a general advocacy for new histories. I call it the call to write new histories, not necessarily by women here, by female historians here, but the likes of Emeritus Professor J.F. Adedeji and Elbaro Ekime. Right from the late 70s, they realized that there was the need to introduce new histories. And part of the thematic issues they highlighted was women's history. Women's history was categorized as part of the new histories, needs to be researched by future generations of historians. And I could remember vividly in the inaugural lecture of Professor Elbaro Ekime in 1979, he kind of, there was a part in his inaugural lecture that he called for writing new areas of political, social, and economic history, introduce new thematic issues by future generations of historians. And I think in one of the journal publications of Professor J.F. Adedeji in 1981, there was also a similar call. And from those two scholars, we could see that there was a pattern that was created subsequently towards the end of the 1980s and 1990s in the researching and writing of women's history. Evolution of writing women's history in Nigeria. Of course, the UN decade played a lot of role in sensitizing, a kind of global sensitization, by which even women in the academics became more conscious of their identity and person. And relatively, the scholars that had called for the writing of new histories advocated that there should be a move away from using the nationalist perspective, centered perspective to writing histories. Rather, there should be more focus on rejigging the sources of writing history to include oral traditions, to include religious cult practices and all that, and thus to provide a new knowledge about women in Africa. So there was a kind of shift of emphasis from a nationalist perspective to writing history to more nuanced use of sources within Africa. Now, who are the pioneers of women's history and the historiography? I can identify three of them. I call them the pioneer scholars. We have Professor Bolanle Awe, we have the late Professor Dinaimba, and Professor Larry Denza. Of these three, two of them are, one of them is only a Nigerian, the other two are foreign. And Professor Dinaimba was of the University of Lagos before her demise. Professor Larry Denza worked in the Department of History, University of Ibadan before she returned to the US. And then we have Professor Bolanle Awe, who is still alive. And she was the one that first of all identified the role of Iyalode in Yoruba political institutions. And she was able to broaden the roles of the Iyalode to project the way women contributed to society. And so that writing on Iyalode actually exposed, that was reactionary because she was trying to counter the male-dominated ideas about writing African history. And so she used the office of the Iyalode to project how women participated in and contributed to the growth of the society. Nina, in her own PhD thesis, placed more emphasis on the political history of the colonial era. And there, that PhD thesis created and more like exposed different dimensions to understand how women contributed to the society and how colonialism influenced women's life in the colonial era and the early post-colonial era. Beyond that, Larry Denza was more interested, and she focused on how Professor Bolanle Awe interpreted women's history in Nigeria. She went further by focusing on the Iyalode institution in Ibadan society. And in subsequent slides, I'm going to be talking about the methods they used in projecting women's history. Now, scholars in women and gender historiography in Nigeria. I'm not sure if we have more than this, there should be anyway, but from what I know so far, we have beyond the pioneer scholars, we have contemporary scholars who are working on women and gender history in Nigeria. Like I mentioned there, Professor Oluwatoyin Adesanya, she's in the University of Lagos. Even though initially she didn't focus on gender in her research, but in the course of her career, she focused on gender and religion with emphasis on women in new religious platform, Pentecostalism. In the Muslim world, she focused on Form 1 and the contributions of, or what the roles of women are in this new wave of religion. Professor Egodi Uchendu, I think she's of the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. She has done some work. I think I read her edited book on masculinity in Africa. And I find it interesting because she also opened a perspective which we tend not to focus too much on. Then we have Professor Nwando Achebe. She is in the US and she focused on gender and monarchy in Eastern Nigeria, trying to give us dynamics of and express the fluidity of the monarchical institution and gender issues associated with it. We have Professor Gloria Chukwutu, who has a book on Igbo women and economic transformation. Most of these works focused mostly on the colonial and pre-colonial era, trying to unravel the dynamics of women's status, lives, and contributions. We have Professor Judith Byfield. She focused on gender and economy in Western Nigeria. One of her prominent works was the one on women dyers in Abeokuta. She was able to look at the socio-economic transformations around the lives of women dyers, how they encountered the colonial state. Then subsequently, we have Dr. Oluwakemi Adesanya. She's of the Redeemers University in Nigeria. She focused on gender and cross-cutting themes. And her PhD thesis, she's on gender in Ikale land, Ondo State. We have Dr. Aisha Bawa. She focused on gender and leadership. Her PhD thesis was on first lady offices in Nigeria and women's history in Northern Nigeria. Then we have Professor Said Aderito, who is a male. He generally does various themes in African history, and he also has gender in his list. He has been able to look at cross-cutting themes around gender, love, romance, and all that. We have Dr. Morenikeji Ashaju of Obafemi Awolowo University. She is concerned about marriage and divorce issues. We have I am speaking here. I also tend to be around the gender and cross-cutting themes. And we have Dr. Sara Panata. I'm going to interpret her own perspective about as related to feminist manifestations of Nigerian women, as we can see from our works and from our PhD thesis. Now, what are the trends? We noticed that Professor Bolanle Awe, in the book that was shown to you earlier on, Nigerian Women in Historical Perspective, she tried to make a mark with that book by relying on biographical methods, explaining the lives of women. So she was able to map women across various geographical spaces in Nigeria. And she used a biographical method to, I think about 10 or 11 women were studied, to create a pattern of how female participation was. And ultimately, most of these women were leaders in their own rights. And the fact that she used biographical method actually created a pathway for future historians to engage in studies on women. In line with Bolanle Awe's biographical method, subsequently we have Cheryl Johnson Hodim and Nina Mba. They did a marvelous work on Alimoto Pelewura in Lagos. No, okay, yes, I'm mixing it up here. On Funmilayo Ransom Kuti of Nigeria, for Women and the Nation, Funmilayo Ransom Kuti of Nigeria. They used the biographical method to actually project how she was an activist and how she contributed to Nigeria's nation building. I think Cheryl Johnson Hodim also wrote an article in Tariq volume, I think it's a 1981 publication anyway, on Alimoto Pelewura. She also used the biographical method to show how social networks of market women manifested in Lagos, and how it became an agency for nationalist agitations, especially in support of Abat Makauli's NCNC. So we could see that the biographical method so far has been used even by other women and even other scholars, but these works I cited were the most prominent ones that reflected how the biographical method was used. Now, when we talked about methods, you know, I've talked about the fact that the pioneer women scholars, they tend to use biographical method. But beyond that, I've been able to study the works of scholars, the contemporary scholars, I mentioned their names the other time. And I realized that I categorized their methods into 4. The first one, I call it situational studies within historical events. Okay, I call it situational studies within historical events by focusing on Aba women riots, Nigerian civil war, issues in the structural adjustments program era and all that. That's situational because we studies that have been done so far are situated within these historical events. We also have what I call locational studies. Locational studies in the sense that, okay, look at a specific town, and like Egba women, Lagos women, Ibadan. Like my own PhD thesis, I focused on Ibadan market women and politics. I know someone that just defended her PhD in the Department of History. She focused on women and taxation in Ijebu. So those are locational studies. Then I have what I can call historical revisionism, explain the status of women within a knowledge construct that, okay, it is given that we have Nigeria's political history, much has been said about it, but we still realize that scholars have been able to even establish and bring more, establish more knowledge about women's history within this knowledge construct: political history, Africa's economic history, intellectual history, military history, among others. Of course, if you look at military history, you notice that during the war, for example, women played significant roles in the process of winning the war and all that. Then we have gender themes. I call these gender themes related to issues not necessarily about men, women alone, but it's cross-cutting because it's also about men. And so I call, for example, I call that love, emotions, romance, prostitution, health, marriage, divorce, and so on. The list is almost endless, but I just mentioned those ones because these are the gender themes that tend to manifest in the work of female historians in Nigeria and even those in diaspora. Okay, I was going to talk about scholars of women history in diaspora because I tend to see a kind of pattern and interventions by which they have been able to contribute. But I think in one way or the other, I've mentioned how, for instance, Lara Denza, she, beyond using biographical methods, you introduced a form of advocacy even in her writing by presenting the paper Yoruba Women, a Historiographical Study. There, she was able to open various perspectives that she feels that future generations of women's history scholars should focus on. I won't stay much on that. And I could also see some patterns on writing women's history in the ways of Gloria Chukwu and Nwando Achebe, and because they adopted method that goes beyond biography, the kind of what I can call cross, I don't know, multiple methods in writing women's history. So female historians in Nigeria have used their doctoral research as a vehicle to launch into women and gender history. Across universities in Nigeria, there are scholars that have adopted biography and general history writing methods to write doctoral theses, focusing on market women and so on. The products of doctoral and postdoctoral research are published in journals, books, and chapter in books. Recent works from Nigerian-based historians of women and gender. For instance, I highlighted Aisha Bawa from Usman Danfodio University, edited a book on women's history in northern Nigeria. I think it was published in 2020. Then Professor Lukin Funke Adebayo and Professor Bolalia were editing a book on in honor of late Nina Mba. And Dr. Oluwatoyin Adesanya, Dr. Mutiat, Oladejo, and Dr. Aisha Bawa are editing a book on our story, the Odyssey of Nigerian women. It's also forthcoming. So there are research outputs from the scholarly works of young academics emerging from doctoral and postdoctoral engagement. Thanks for listening.
And the big games of musical chairs, I think it's Deji, it's your turn. It's your turn. Come around, come. Do you have a presentation here, Deji? Okay. Please come in, please come in. Juliette, it just says Juliette Reflé starting screen sharing. Started. There you go. Can someone confirm you can see it as well on your end?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon from Ibadan, Nigeria, and I would like to thank the organizers for having me. It was initially a tough decision to agree whether I could speak on this topic. For example, the Dr. Oladejo mentioned something earlier, situational, and that's the way I would describe how I found myself in this kind of discipline. So for me, it began when I worked as a research assistant for a PhD student from Europe, and then we had a whole lot of data. And I was sleeping with data on women and all like that. And because I was transcribing, I was also reading. So I was internalizing some of those things. So I needed to, at a point, be sure of what I was doing. And then I felt, let me look into what gender studies is actually. So for me to do that, I decided to look a little away from University of Ibadan, where many of these things started, although University of Ibadan will not actually claim to be the originator of this. So I looked away and tried to check where I first heard the word or the discipline, gender studies. So introduction, as we are well aware that gender studies has grown immensely in the last 2 decades. That is from the turn of the 21st century. We have a lot of gender studies centers, institutes, and they are now outside even some disciplines that we used to have them. So, like in many other parts of the world, gender now has dedicated buildings. For example, we have them as courses now. We have gender studies as a postgraduate studies, for example, at the University of Ibadan Institute of African Studies. We have conferences dedicated for gender studies. We have publications and professional network as well. But this was not the case before the 21st century. So, unfortunately, we had this aspect of a study facing a kind of a serious criticism as to its legitimacy as an academic field. Interestingly, even until today, some people still share this sentiment. I think I was like that at some point until I did some work and I realized that it's a very, very rigorous thing. And I could not actually look back. I had to do what I had to do. In any case, because I'll be pointing at some things, the way I understand them. The first slide, still the first slide. Okay, so we have funding issues this day, for example, which affect the university system and the higher education in Nigeria, as far as I know, have been pressured to actually expand and diversify their source of income. So we have more courses coming in. Now, I would presume that gender is actually a sweet word. It has a nice gloss, and we have the center springing up in different parts of the country, in different institutions now. So a little bit of history, as far as I know, based on my knowledge of or lack of it. Now, according to Bameke 2011, women's studies as a specific field of gender studies actually gave birth to gender studies in Nigeria. And it was in 1996 that the first attempt was made to actually upgrade what is called women's studies, because if it is women's studies, maybe a lot of men will have to justify their existence if they are interested. So now gender studies at this meeting, which is of, I think the Network for Women's Studies in Nigeria, they try to articulate what could be called a curriculum for gender studies. So many specialists in that area actually came for that workshop, and notably among them we have Shami Pereira, we have Penelope Roberts, we have Oluwatoyin Adesanya, and UI is Abiola Odejide. So from this, I could say that okay, fine, gender studies are started in a way, and then it has continued to grow. So before I continue, this is the state we are right now. I think we are at the last time I checked, and that is about 1 year or let's say 18 months. We have at least 20 centers. Some of these centers, perhaps maybe the institution feel that gender studies is not big enough to actually have a dedicated center. So sometimes they try to merge it with some other areas of research. But largely we have centers, we have units, we have institutes, as the case may be, based on different institutional templates. So from what I have here, you would see that in the southern part of the country, we have more of these centers. That does not mean that the northern part is not active, especially ABU's area, Ahmadu Bello University's area in Kaduna State, and the University of Jos. The University of Jos is the first institution to have a gender policy. But then in the south, you see that in Nigeria, education is under the concurrent legislative list. As such, you have federal government building institutions and state government doing such too. But I think the southern states have an edge when it comes to this. So you see more of these centers in state schools in the southern part of the country, in the southern part of the country. But generally, all the federal schools in a way have been very active. So in the country, we have at least over half of a federal, over half of the university. Oh, sorry, as the federal government has its universities in at least over half of the states. But at the state level, we have a state in the south having more universities, and a lot of them now they are now having what now? They are now having gender studies centers. So that actually stimulate my interest in what I did. This paper I am presenting. Next slide, please. So I decided to focus on a center in a very small university, just to understand what I was doing at a point and understand the growth of this discipline. So we have a Center for Human Rights and Gender Education. Center for Human Rights and Gender Education. It is based in a small university in southwest geopolitical zone of the country, Taisho University of Education. It is a university of education in that whatever you study at the university, you should actually include a pedagogical aspect to it. You should be able to teach whatever you have learned in the university. So this presentation offers analysis of how funding, institutional politics, and enlisting of academic staff have shaped the development of gender studies in the 21st century. In a way, I was particularly about enlisting of academic staff because I have my first degree in political science education and master's degree in peace and conflict studies, but I did my research on women and elections and politics. So at the point I was confused, at the point I realized that I needed to be grounded in what it is, what gender study has to say. So why did I finally settle for this center? You will understand that in Nigeria, many of the centers that we have as it is today, they are more of an afterthought. There's a university already, and later you are not having a center springing up, especially since the turn of the 21st century. But the case of George is very interesting because it has been part of the university arrangement and template from the inception. The university was upgraded from a college to a university in 2005. Same year, church was established. Same year, church was established. The next slide, please. So a little background about the center. So it was established in 2005, like I said earlier. Now, it was meant to operate not just like a conventional school department, a conventional school unit, but then it is expected that it should collaborate with institutions outside the university. So whatever you do within the gown is actually expressed in the town. That means that you are having a high environmental impact of the research they do. So basically, their responsibilities include gender awareness and education. They talk about capacity building and humanitarian services. There's the aspect of professional and academic program too, and internal and external linkages for partnership and affiliation, for partnership and affiliation. So I would go straight to the things I found because, like I said earlier, it's a micro level analysis. Dr. Oladejo has actually given a kind of window to understand what it is in the whole country. So this is the micro level analysis, focusing on just a center, So now the center is expected to be financially independent. It's expected to be financially independent. As such, they advise the center to actually look out for funding from corporate organizations, from non-government organizations to actually push their research, That was the first thing I found out. But then I was a little skeptical about this kind of a move, because in itself, looking for funding is beautiful, but how you look for it is essential. We have to actually look into how you look for it. So we are talking about being careful about donor-driven agenda. If, for example, an agency is giving you money to carry out research, will they not overtake what you want to do? Will they not overtake what you want to do? So that was the first thing, my first kind of criticism to that kind of idea. And again, I was concerned about trivializing important research engagement, Next slide. So institutional politics and challenge of restructuring came to the fore very fast. I was easily able to identify this. Like, for example, the center has a journal. They call it HURAGE, the Journal of Human Rights and Gender Education. Interestingly, the other way around, it was last published in 2010. So even until the 2010, the journal has been published intermittently. It was not following a kind of normal schedule. And that is one thing. Another one is, okay, it's still connected to funding. They talked about not having enough funding to carry out the activities of the center. And again, there is a question of expertise. There's a question of expertise. So this came to the fore, and a vice chancellor in 2014 saw this, and she felt the need to restructure the center. How she wanted to achieve that was to domicile this center in a department that has a close research affinity to what they do. So such could be found in social sciences and humanities. For example, sociology, there's an aspect of political science too that talks about this, and history, of course, maybe anthropology in a way, and many other cognate research areas, many other cognate disciplines. So the institutional politics started. Yeah, next slide. So from one of the people I interviewed, this was a former director of the center. He said this, and I would like to read that. He said, I remember in 20... He said, I remember in 2014, we had a Senate meeting and such discussion came up. The Vice Chancellor asked that she should be well guided on which department should host the center. So many heads of department actually wanted to own charge. The political science said it was its prerogative. The social studies said it was its prerogative. Counseling psychology said the same thing. Even said the same thing. So on the basis of this, they could not actually move from there, and the VC had to step down that move. What the situation is now, I'm still kind of following, but I'm sure it has not been domiciled in any of the schools or department. It has not been domiciled in any of the schools department. So I'm running up right now. So we have a recruiting specialist. Researchers are drawn from different academic departments in the universities. So now parameters for selection include interest in research, which should be demonstrated through publications. So if you would become the director of the center, they look through your CV and they see what you have done regarding gender studies, your area of research that actually incorporates gender. And on the basis of that, they are guided on who should become the director of the center. Personally, I feel perhaps this is not enough, because in a way, when you work in social sciences and history, at some point you look into gender issues. It's beautiful. I think it's beautiful. The issue I have with this is that, okay, fine, if you are a professor of history or social sciences, you have your primary department, you have your work there. So this is an extra, and I do not know if the dedication would be full. I do not know if the dedication would be full. And again, another consideration would be the kind of proposal you are presenting to actually move the center forward. They look into this, and then they make their decisions. So from the list of those that have actually served as fellows in the center, there was none that I found that had maybe a certificate or a degree in gender studies. They have had to do gender research from the prism of their primary field of study, Yeah, so I conclude. I think I'm still within time. It's cool. So scholars do gender research from the prism of their primary, like I said earlier. So while this is not bad in itself, but I think gender studies over the years have become fully formed, if not in Nigeria, maybe in many other places. And they have developed methods and approaches, and the discipline is now well documented. Although there's a sizable number of contribution from Africa and even Nigeria. I think gender studies in Nigeria still requires refining in methodology and content and curriculum. For example, if the way I'm going with my research, I feel the need that at a point in time, I need to be still well grounded in theories, in methodologies, to make my research have the very good output that it deserves. So this was what I was doing, and to see how I can improve my research as a graduate student. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adebayo, Adedeji, and our final speakers now, Dr. Sharon Omotoso.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be here, and I want to thank Dr. Panata and everyone who has put this together. This is a very important discussion at this time, and I feel that coming together, I can see faces, familiar faces, friends, colleagues, people we have worked together, and maybe I should say potentially new friends. And I want to say that this has been a good time sharing together, especially listening to the first two presenters. They have done a good work presenting, preparing the ground for my presentation. So I'll just go right into it. My title is Gender Studies in Nigeria, Looking Back, Going Forward. And I am doing this because over time, I have tried to look at the trends and how things have been going within the field of gender studies. But of course, just like Mutiat started out with the issues around women's studies and how women's studies translated or transformed or transformed, as I will say it, into gender studies. I will also start out that way. I'll share my slides, but I will do more of reading from my notes as I do that. So please just follow me as I go ahead. Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay,
We can.
thank you.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I'll just go straight into it. The androcentrification of the academia, which had prioritized the male-centric curriculum across disciplines, triggered the emergence of women's studies, so that women's realities and perspectives are also accommodated. And the turn towards women's studies in Africa grew after the UN International Women's Year and Decade in 1975 to 1985, when women perspectives began to gain entrance into disciplines. And from the early 1980s, African feminists have made concerted efforts to address distortions among Western feminists of Africa and of African women's lives and realities. And as a result of that, we have the attention of scholars called to what Ellen Salu described as the social sciences perpetual deafness, exemplified by death of feminist scholarship in the social sciences in Africa. I will be looking at 4 key areas this afternoon: activism, policy, scholarship, pedagogy. This might not be the order in which I will look at it, but please just come along with me. Okay. By the 1980s and 90s, the introduction of studies on men and masculinities provided a new dimension and the necessity to study both men and women by critiquing gender inequality in personal relationships and social positioning, which then necessitated a shift in approaches from women's studies or feminist studies, as we call it, to a broader view that we call gender studies. And we see gender studies having different nomenclature. Some people say it is cross-disciplinary, it is interdisciplinary, it is multidisciplinary. Some say it is non-disciplinary, neo-disciplinary, and on and on and on like that. Thriving on an argument that African men have also been disempowered by racism and colonial practices, gender is useful as an analytic concept for Africa. This created the need to consider gender of or an alternative to women's studies, consequent upon which earlier introduced women's studies program either metamorphosed into gender studies department, center, or institute, or better still, a combination of both, presenting gender as a more contemporary term for women's studies. This was not without resistance, as some scholars regard the transition from women's studies to gender studies as political in its revert to generalities instead of studying women in particular. We have some who argue that there's a return to masculine construction of knowledge, and some argue that it refers to loss of confidence and sense of direction in women's studies, and that gender studies is a dilution signifying how feminist knowledge has been tamed and reconstituted by the academy, thus increasing the tendency of obscuring power imbalance while discussing both men and women as equally oppressed. Despite these transitions, scholars reckon that women's studies remain central to the study of gender relations, as it further opens it beyond its original starting point of liberation movements and activisms. Furthermore, the key strength of gender studies is its enduring multi and interdisciplinary nature, displayed in its continued penetration into mainstream disciplines with profound impact on contemporary theory and attitudes to knowledge production. For convenience, in this discussion, I will just pick the two words together, women's studies and gender studies, and I'll call it women or gender studies, so that we can capture both concepts as we go on. And I want to move as fast as I can to quickly do a review of gender studies or women studies in Nigeria. Review of women or gender studies in Nigeria will be done on that 3 key points, like I've mentioned: policy, activism, pedagogy, or scholarship. As we the world conferences in Mexico, Nairobi, Copenhagen, Beijing provided platforms on issues of concern to women and the world at large. Following the adoption of the CEDAW, women's opportunities to achieve social, political, economic, legal equality, and so on gained more recognition in Nigeria. And the military era, by the time we were entering into the military era in Nigeria, there was a decline of women's movement as First Ladies' initiatives took over most public activities aimed at improving women's lives. Similar in this regard is a noticeable transformation of women's activist groups into non-governmental organizations among civil society groups. By the return of democratic rule in 1999, women's movement has also transformed and expanded. On one hand is the ever-growing women's NGO, who pursue urgent international causes ranging from ending feminized poverty, girl-child education, HIV and AIDS, and so on and so forth. And those causes surfaced because of heavy funding support. Please note, because of heavy funding support for those causes. On the other hand is the political movement of women's group and first ladies who have pet projects where wives of state governors engage in selected women emancipation projects in alignment with the central office of the wife of the president so that they can garner support. And since the proliferation of internet and social media platforms, formal organizing of women's movement thinned out. As women's activism moved into the virtual world of online activisms, where signing online petitions and debating pressing issues on blogs and social media became pervasive. This is not without its shortcomings, as feminist movements also became largely unregulated, since anyone could parade themselves as feminists while actually maintaining underlying a feminist or anti-feminist interests. An interesting distinction between feminism and colonial or post-colonial women's movements and the recent online feminist activism. Current female politicians dissociate themselves from any form of feminist identities, more so that most courses pursued are not necessarily directly with the need and aspiration of grassroots women. Could it then be said, I mean, that's my next question. Could it be said that women's studies influenced women's activism or not? This will be discussed as I go on. Talking about scholarship, you'll discover that in terms of writing, the first published research on Nigerian women by Professor Toun Ogunsheye, and then we have the teaching. The teaching of women's studies in Nigerian universities was initiated in 1979 at Ahmadu Bello University with a Women in Society course in the sociology department. And that was meant to, of course, to strengthen all of that. The already spreading effort to develop women's studies in Nigerian institutions. Word of Women's Research and Documentation Center was established in 1987. And it was aimed at coordinating research and documentation efforts at various women research groups. Initiative of Provalale Aware, who has been mentioned earlier in the discussion, closely assisted by colleagues, including Professor Nina Mba, Professor Larry Denza, and at the Institute of African Studies. And then by 1997, most institutions introduced women or gender studies using integrationist approach. What I mean by that is they now introduced it into courses. They infused, gender studies or women's studies into selected courses within their departments. While the proliferation of women and gender studies is a commendable milestone, identified problems of implementation still exist within institutions that are yet to establish a women and gender studies program. The challenges include non-acceptance by university senate, government cutback in educational funding, vehement opposition, not necessarily by social scientists anymore, but by society and parents who confuse activism with academic work. Now, going into pedagogy, of course, we've been able to establish that over the time, just like the previous speaker mentioned, Deji mentioned, that we now have a number of women and gender studies centers across the universities in Nigeria. I have a list of 14, and in case anybody is listening and your university is not included, please get back to me so that we can update what we have. And we have all of these, who have been struggling with one issue or the other. But let me move quickly to pedagogy. It borders on classroom management skills and content-related skills. And critical pedagogy posits that knowledge is not static and unitary, but rather results from an open-ended process of negotiation and interaction between teacher and students. So in that case, both students and teachers are subjects and not objects. And in its multifaceted nature, key issues of concern in women and gender studies pedagogy range from economic reforms, women's representation in government and civil society, issues of sexuality and identity, religion, culture, health, and so on and so forth. And as far back as 1996, the Network for Women's Studies in Nigeria lamented the paucity of gender studies and research in Africa, accompanied by persistent gender-blind policies. On this note, they set up a committee on curriculum development with the aim of producing a national curriculum for women and gender studies in Nigeria. For them, the curriculum must seek to achieve attitude, knowledge, and skills objective, while guideline on method of learning and assessment should also be provided. By these, they agreed that women and gender studies pedagogy must carefully attend to content, learning experience, intended outcomes, and evidence of learning. It is on this note that the paradigm of knowledge production, the pedagogies used, the formation of the institutions, and the way in which it is reproduced have all come under scrutiny. So for Pereira, in 2004, in her assessment of women and gender studies in Nigeria, she noted that a scenario marked by the continuing dominance of first ladyism from military to civilian rule, where many have difficulties distinguishing between pronouncement of first ladies and women on women, pronouncement of first ladies on women, and women's studies proper, or national machineries for women from women's autonomous organizations, and apparent inability of gender and women's studies to further strategies or strategic interest of women for gender justice. In response to the burning issues, the Gender Studies Program of the Institute of African Studies, University of Ibadan, organized a conference in honor of our matriarch, Professor Bolanle Awe, in May 2017. And the theme was Gender Studies in Africa, Emerging and Emerging Trends. Emerging and Emerging Trends. It was agreed at the conference that a review of women gender studies pedagogy in Nigeria and Africa should consider and contribute a legitimate body of knowledge to be taught. Who validates the knowledge, especially when not produced by the West? What should and should not be taught? Can one still say that feminist pedagogy is appropriate for women and gender studies in Africa? If not, what alternatives may be explored? What should women and gender studies pedagogy include or exclude, among others? These reckon that content and effect of women and gender studies scholarship in Nigeria is worthy of critical analysis. With regards to content, interlocking and overlapping subject matter still exists. The flexibility of course content makes for lecturers and researchers to approach course content from varying perspectives and depending on their fields of study or area of specialization. This, however, could also be problematic in that students may be overwhelmed with issues within the teacher's field of interest. This consequently necessitates a wider composition of faculty from multidisciplinary backgrounds. Currently, the women and gender studies programs are equally taking global issues into cognizance, thereby providing comparative platforms across cultures and continents. Notably, as much as gender studies have gained considerable acceptance, there is still a erroneous perception that gender is about women and that feminism is un-African. I move on to policy. And on policy—
You have 5 minutes, Prof. Sorry, my apologies.
Sorry?
So you've got 5 minutes left. Sorry, Prof.
5 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, is that okay?
So I'll run with it. Okay, let me move to scholar I've discussed pedagogy. Okay. Okay, let me just move to more recent developments in Nigeria's women and gender studies. In recent past, we have had women and gender studies, increased number of gender scholars. Yeah, we have had that because the programs, we now have programs, that offer that award certificates. And despite considerable interest of gender specialists across disciplines, the regulatory powers of gender scholars is fast slipping out of hand. Their new theoretical postulations are not answering to expectedly normative enlightenment, consciousness raising, and change-focused duties. Public enlightenment platforms and policy spaces are growing susceptible to hijack by ignorant gender enthusiasts. What are my observed trends? Succession issues. A few passionate scholars who map out frameworks, but are often not structurally positioned or empowered for implementation. That happens a lot because they are not in the policy space. There are called women gender studies researchers who are not often employed into universities, probably because they feel that they don't fit into the discussion at the university. Having to operate from civil society platforms pose systematic or systemic restriction to their scholarly contributions and eventual pragmatizing of such. Vibrant women and gender studies scholars often get co-opted into other assignments while still consolidating their efforts in mentoring and building formidable WGS team. Hence, the setback in solidifying the impactful women and gender studies programs. Of course, we also have brain drain. Majority of people who study, who are vast and versatile, who study gender studies, have had to move outside the country to do other things, and that disrupts the cycle of mentorship. And then we have body monitoring, regulatory issues, within the gender studies community. Lack of or inefficiency of existing bodies intended to monitor scholarship, research, and activism in Nigeria is an issue that we need to pay attention to going forward. Then media engagement, the prevalence of political sidetracking of women in elective positions in Nigeria, and long-standing suspicion on women and gender studies. There is always this suspicion that people who study it, why would you go into a university and study men and women for 2 semesters or 2 years or whatever? There are still suspicions. Then the need to rescue feminist and gender projects from mere enthusiasts who are ignorant of historical developments and current aspirations of women and gender studies research, and persistently pervade media spaces with erroneous content, thus complicating prospects of women and gender studies. Of course, there are internal bickerings, especially within some of our institutions. Gladly, I must say that that is not existing within the University of Ibadan, because each of the women and gender studies group that are within the university know their roles. Of course, within the University of Ibadan, we have the Gender Studies Department, which is an award, is a degree awarding postgraduate unit. We have the Gender Mainstreaming Office that sees to internal issues within the university. We have the Campus Women's Society. We have the Women's Law Clinic. And of course, we have the Women's Research and Documentation Center. Okay, so my conclusion is this: is women and gender studies in crisis? I asked this question some years ago when we attended a conference in Bellagio, and I say that there are 4 issues that we need to pay attention to: funding, collegial support, acceptance, content, or pedagogy. But my final answer will be that women and gender studies is not in crisis. It is all about agency. It's all about us putting our survival strategies together. It's all about us putting our diplomatic tactics together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Omotoso, and thank you to the 3 speakers. So now let's give the floor to Dr. Hugon for a first series of comments and maybe questions for the speakers.
Well, hello to all the people who've given their presentations. Thank you to the French Institute in Ibadan and to the GIS Jean in France. Thank you to Sara for organizing with other colleagues this webinar. I'm very happy to meet some of you whose names I've heard over the years. When I was Sarah's PhD supervisor. So it's an honor for me to be with you today. Okay, so yes, I have a few comments and also questions for you, for all 3 of you actually. And of course, like everybody who's followed these presentations, I noticed that, of course, some of the themes that each developed overlapped with the other presentation, which is a good thing. I'm not saying this in a from a critical point of view, but it shows how your presentations have an echo with what your colleagues have been saying. So what? Maybe I go, I mean, I was taking notes. This is how my method worked today for my role as a discussant. So I'll both ask questions and make comments on each presentation. Therefore, starting with Dr. Oladejo's presentation and then moving on to the others. There was one small point that struck me with Dr. Oladejo's presentation, which was her use of the word reactionary. And I think I'm going to need an explanation as to the meaning of the word, because in French and in French scholarship, the same word will not be used in order to describe a reaction, any reaction to a social situation, but it will always have a political meaning, which is of the, let us say, right, you know, right hand, left, sorry, right-handed people. That is, you will, if somebody is in a reactionary position, it means that they will necessarily be less progressive, more conservative than what they react to. So I was a bit, you know, concerned by the way the word was used, and I need some explanation. Then I was really interested in what you said about the various fields in which the historiography of women and gender in Nigeria developed. And in many ways, I'm not a specialist of women's and gender history in France, but I happen to teach a few courses in the subject. So some of the things that you said brought to my mind the fact that it's actually quite similar to what has developed in France, which is interesting because I think we also need sometimes to say how unspecific each country is, how some of the trends, not all of them, are global. And so what I'd like to comment upon is the various fields of women's and gender historiography in Nigeria. And if I remember well what you said, it all started with studies on women in politics, that the question of power and the place of women in, you know, power structures. And the very same thing happened with the historiography of French women, for example. This was the first topic which was developed in the late 70s. So it's about the same chronology as well. And then, of course, quite a few studies on women in the economy, in the productive system. And on this particular point, maybe I'd like to know more, if there is time, on the reproductive versus productive role of women. How was this concept taken into account in women's history in Nigeria, if at all? And then, of course, in what we can call the private sphere, family, conjugality, marriage, divorce, sexuality, motherhood, etc. And this, of course, is also very developed in, let's say, French women's history. I'm not absolutely certain to understand, but it's my, you know, English is not my first language. So what you meant by cross-cutting themes. So maybe if you wouldn't mind coming back to this point just to explain what you meant. And then my last question to you would be, can you tell us, have you spotted some themes that have not yet been studied, which in your opinion might be developed in the future? And if so, what would they be? I hope I'm clear, and if I'm not, please bear with me and do ask me to be more precise, please. And then, oh, sorry, I said I had the last questions, but I still have, I yet have another one, which is, can you maybe develop a little bit more about the ways in which gender as a tool is used intersectionally, let's put it that way, with other critical tools such as, you know, age, class, race, etc. Do you think this is something that is typical of women's and gender history in Nigeria, or is let's call it intersectionality, not that much used in the historiography. So this is my last question to you. Now to Mr. Adedeji, I would say that again, the same one of your conclusions also applies to the French system, in which, and it's probably even stronger in France actually. In France, the academia is still completely structured by disciplines. The whole system is about disciplines. The way, if somebody is recruited, he or she will be recruited in the academia or any research institution as a specialist of either sociology, political science, history, anthropology, etc. There's virtually no space for gender studies or any other studies actually. So it's all organized by discipline, and there is no place whatsoever for themes or topics, nor for methods or approaches. And some of, in the younger generations, especially, PhD students and future colleagues, tend to see it as a real problem and some way analyze it as a sort of backwardness or conservatism of the French academia. And I'm still, debating whether it is a problem, whether it's actually necessary to develop other fields recognized as such and give some, legitimacy to these new fields, such as gender studies. Another way of putting the question, and I realize, I'm sorry, that I'm more commenting than asking you questions, but I think maybe for the general reflection, it could be interesting. I think part of what your presentation inspired me is, should gender studies become autonomous as a discipline in a way, which I think you were somehow implying, but I could be wrong. Or should it, on the contrary, infuse in each discipline? And maybe those two trends are not contradictory, and maybe it's actually possible to wish for both these phenomena to happen. And I think it's not just a question about Nigeria, but it's also a more general question, but it will have its own specificity in Nigeria. Now I'd like to ask a few questions and make a few comments to Dr. Omotoso. And again, I'd like to thank you, all three of you, for your presentations, which I found really inspiring. So what struck me in Dr. Omotoso's presentation was that she emphasized the gap between research and, so to speak, real life, as if something positive was happening in the field of research, i.e. the development of gender studies or women's and gender studies, which someone like me, of course, will be happy about. But in a way, if I got what you said correctly, the problem is that the impact on what women's experiences, on a daily basis are is quite low and possibly non-existent. So maybe you can tell us more about this. And also, I was wondering whether part of this problem, if it is a problem, but I would venture it is, can come from the anti-gender movements, both in the academia, if it does exist, and it's a real question. I'm not sure how strong it is, but I can tell you that in France, it is becoming a problem. The anti-gender movement is has become stronger and stronger over the years, and it's now more structured, more vocal, and more powerful than it has been, than it's ever been. I'm sorry. So maybe you could tell us a bit more about that, and also, of course, and one reflects the other necessarily. Maybe you could tell us more about anti-gender movements or trends in the general society. That is, who can you define as leaders of an anti-gender agenda, for example? And then I'd like to ask you maybe to tell us a bit more. I don't want names or examples, but I'd like to know a bit more about what you call gender enthusiasts, about whom you seem to be a bit suspicious. And maybe you can tell us a bit more about why and what your experiences have been with this group of gender enthusiasts, who, if I understand you well, are also gender ignorant. So enthusiasm and ignorance seem to go, hand in hand. But maybe you can tell us a little more about this. Thank you again, and please do ask me questions if I haven't been clear enough.
Thank you, Anne. Mutiat, would you like to start?
Okay. Yes, thank you for the comments. I like the fact that you talked about how the experiences in the historiography of French women is almost the same about Nigeria. So that means, as you said, the trend is global, and then it will be good to have further investigations into how these global trends manifest. I remember Mama Bolanle, where she contributed a chapter in writing women's history across a continent some years back, and I think probably we are due for a kind of a new book on looking at the historiography of women across the globe. What I meant by reactionary is the fact that, like I said earlier, and I'm going to emphasize, when the foremost historians in Nigeria were writing about women's history, African history generally, doing a kind of reconstruction against the European perception and views, because the European perception and view was that Africans had no history, there's nothing to write about Africans. So these historians were saddled with the responsibility of negating that perception. And so it was reactionary. And beyond that, by the 1970s and 80s, the likes of Bolanle and others also, their stand was also reactionary, because they were trying to react to the way African history has been constructed across societies, and then conversing for the need to write women's history, or put more emphasis about the roles of women in society. So that's what I meant. Then you talked about reproductive and productive role of women, and how this is taken into account. Yeah, that's a new area. I know some scholars are younger historians are working on issues related to health, maternal health, and all that. But I haven't really seen works bordering on the reproductive role of women, except for the fact that when you highlighted some of the things you meant, like family motherhood, I know that I'm involved in a research that we are presently trying to investigate motherhood and fatherhood in Africa and impact on improved children well-being. It's a kind of a multidisciplinary project across African universities. I think about 6 universities are involved. So it's a kind of investigation we're involved in, and I'm coming in that project to more like historicize and see how we can contextualize motherhood in within the context of Nigerian history. Then what I meant by cross-cutting themes, yes, even within gender itself or within history, you know, there is social history, there is political history, there is economic history, intellectual history, and we tend to see that most of the scholars are highlighted. Necessarily, if you study their journals, their publications, they have been able to use more like dance around all aspects of history, be it social, political, or economic. And also, we can also match them with various thematic issues, even under gender itself, because when we talk about gender issues, we tend to talk about like issues of family, motherhood, justice. And so at the end of the day, we realize that most of these scholars, their works goes across various disciplinary requirements. It goes across various thematic issues. Thematic issues, I mean, when you talk about romance, emotion, love, justice, and all that. And then you talked about, have I spotted areas that, new areas in which gender, okay, have I spotted new areas? Of course, I talked about motherhood, that you have asked about the reproductive. I talked about motherhood. I'm very interested in looking at how motherhood really manifested. And I think I did something basically earlier on issues of motherhood and child nutrition. And so like my interest in motherhood is something I'm working on presently, and I'm trying to understand issues around it in the historical perspective. And then ways in which gender is used, yeah, well, I'm still, ways in which we can use gender across age, class, and well, in Africa, actually, there are, I think some sociologists and anthropologists are better off given that kind of dichotomies and differentiations, like Dr. Vincent said the other time about Oyewumi's work on gender issues, the invention of women, and I think more on Oyewumi's work on invention of women. She has been able to give us idea of, especially in Oyo Yoruba societies, how issues of age and class matter in gender. So thank you.
Sorry.
I'm almost done.
Thank you very much for your answers. And of course, I'm really looking forward to reading your production and other people's production on, especially on the history of motherhood, because yes, my latest book was precisely on the history of motherhood in colonial Ghana. So yeah, I'm really looking forward. Thank you very much for your reply.
Yes.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Thank you very much for summarizing my presentation and the enlightenment. Actually, it's what I was confused about too, that should gender studies become autonomous, or should it be infused into existing or more established discipline? The truth is that I don't have a straight answer to this. And I'm happy that a more experienced person is giving a kind of a clearer picture of what it is. But if I'm to say anything, from my presentation, I said that a lot of people share the sentiment that maybe gender research is not that serious. And at a point, I had that sentiment too, until I was involved assisting someone. And I realized that it's a lot of work, it's rigorous and interesting. So for me, if it is worth doing, I think it's worth doing well. So if gender study centers are growing by the day, I think what they are supposed to do, they are supposed to do it well and should not be like an addendum. So if anyone is shifting focus, perhaps maybe because he or she is interested in that area of research, there should be a kind of a more serious dedication to that aspect of research too. So if it will become autonomous or not autonomous, I think I would want to keep quiet and get more experience to see if that would be a right decision to take. But simply for me, if it's worth doing well. That's what I would like to say. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was so much enjoying the conversation that I forgot that I'm next to speak. Okay, and because I have the privilege of being the last person to respond to this, I will quickly just touch on two issues that pertains to the earlier speakers. And one is about the issue of new areas of research in gender, which you asked Mutiat to respond to. Mutiat is a historian, and she would speak mainly within our field of research and what she has found. But I am in the gender studies unit, and we have seen multiplicities of research from places, from different disciplines. And I must say that truly there are new areas that are emerging. One example that I will give to that is one of the books that we worked on. I was section editor to that book, and it has I can say an all-encompassing view or perspective to women's studies in Africa, and that's the Palgrave Handbook of Women's Studies in Africa. The Palgrave Handbook of Women's Studies in Africa. Several issues: women in diaspora, women in history, women in arts, women in law, colonial history, current trends, and so on and so forth. So many things came up, within that. It's a whole big book, talking about several things. And for me personally, I want to say that I have identified one area that I feel that is new and should be explored in gender studies, and that's what I currently do. I work in the area of political communication, and I'm bringing women into that space. And that was why I was able to do the Women in Political Communication in Africa, and to do the co-edited one, that's where are women? That was when I saw actually focused on women specifically. And I also contributed to that book that Mutiat was talking about in remembrance, in honor of Professor Ninamba. And what I did in that work was to begin to tease things that were never called that within the book, within some of the books that Ninamba wrote. So I started looking at what are the political communication trends of women, even right from pre-colonial times and so on and so forth. So people are coming up with different ideas, different issues. I've seen a comment, in the chat box that says something about the issues, and with time you begin to see them come out. Specialization, I think I can also speak on that. Should gender studies become a specialized field? Should we have people who basically, studied gender from the beginning to their PhD level? I would say, yes, we may get to that point. We should get to that point eventually, but we are not there yet. Bachelors in gender studies. So most people still come from their various fields, in their bachelors, and come into gender studies. And because of that, that's one of the things we saw, the beauty and the helpfulness of emerging from your primary field and then into gender studies, which is why UI, the University of Ibadan, proposed, and brought about the gender studies at the graduate level. So it's beautiful when we are all coming from different backgrounds, we bring our perspectives into gender issues. But perhaps in the nearest future, we're going to get into it, but we're not yet there. And we're not ready for that now because we don't have the human power to do that. And I should also note that there is what we call area studies and there is strict disciplinary studies. So when we talk about area studies and we begin to situate gender within spaces like we are discussing Nigeria now, there are things that will come up, and you will have to approach it from strict disciplinary viewpoints. Those are not my questions. So I leave them and I run to my questions. You were asking about the gap between research and reality. Yes, majority of listeners who are familiar with Nigeria will tell you that what we have in reality is really worrisome. We find lots and lots of things online, Twitter handles, groups that call themselves feminists. They say this today, they say that tomorrow. They mention things, they discuss issues that they don't have groundings on. They don't know where it is coming from. Somebody just wakes up and say, I'm a feminist. So what does it mean to be a feminist? They do not know. So those are the kinds of things I'm trying to talk about. So when we talk about the reality of gender, we still have lots and lots of issues that we discuss in the academia, but are not yet being translated, which is why we are doing much more of advocacy. And we need many more people to do advocacy in that regard. Let's begin to marry research with the realities. That's important. That's why I said the gap between research and reality. I know my time is almost done, so I'll rush. And then we have what you asked about anti-gender movements. Yes, there are anti-gender movements. Part of those are people who will say, why would you do gender studies? A master's in gender studies, for what? They ask questions like that. And we have them because of culture, because of religion, and of course, because of what the media and social media is presenting about, the wrong image, the wrong perception they give about feminists, about women's studies, about women in the academia, and on like that. And then who are gender enthusiasts? People who feel that there is money in gender research. People who think that gender research is popular. People who think that gender research is becoming, attractive, and they just jump at it. And then we have gender ignorance. They don't even know what we are talking about, but because of our culture, because of our beliefs and the rest of that, they just come to a conclusion about what is done. Majority of our students, until they get in, they don't even know. And then they begin to tell you, oh, wow, this is an eye-opener. And this has been the beauty of gender studies, within the University of Ibadan. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Omotoso. So now we listen to Dr. Sharon Olutayo. Please, our speakers, let's try to be short if you can, so we can then listen to our audience and their questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thanks so much. Thank you, dear presenters, for the insightful discourse that you have exposed to us. I have 3 questions, but these questions, I think the presenters will go home and think over it, and maybe it will also guide them. One, for the first presenter, Dr. Oladejo, I was thinking, in what ways as women's studies or historiography enhanced knowledge production in gender studies, even in contemporary time? We have a lot in the past, but in recent times, in what ways as women's history enhanced knowledge production? And for Deji, I want to ask, what is the difference between that center you studied and other gender studies centers in Nigeria? I just want you to think over it. And Dr. Omotoso, in terms of pedagogy, what is the dynamics in our teaching and learning activities in the past and in contemporary time? Is there any changes over time? And I just want to also have a brief discussion the three presenters mentioned something that is so key, and I think maybe it's Deji and Dr. Omotoso. You said there were a lot of criticisms in terms of maybe developing gender studies centers, and Dr. Omotoso said the issue of non-acceptance by the University Senate. And I think that is the history. I mean, that is the beginning of the history of the gender studies program in the university. There were a lot of criticisms before it was eventually approved by the Senate in the 2012-2013 session. And the major argument was that, what about gender studies? What is it all about? What is the discipline? What is the relevance of the discipline, even to scholarship? So, and it is for that reason that the gender studies program at the University of Ibadan was subsumed under the Institute of African Studies. It's not a program standing on its own. And over time, I mean, we have a lot of success records. We have students, our first set of students were 17, 12 were master's students, 5 of them were for the higher degree. And I mean, for the first 3, had 1 male and a male student, and the male student will always ask, I don't even know what gender studies is all about, because the first class we ask is, what is your understanding of gender studies, so that we would find a way of making them understand what gender studies is all about. They have that misconception that gender studies is all about women's affairs and all sorts. But towards the end of the first semester, they come back and tell us that, I'm so happy. I mean, I got admitted into this course, and it's like an eye opener. And interestingly, in this present, this last session that we had, this present session, we have 7 males. And I mean, it was like, why? And they said they have heard from other previous students that what they are being taught in gender studies is not all about women affairs and not all about women. It's but giving us a balanced view of the reality in life. And looking at our course context, I mean, we started with about 12 courses, looking at Introduction to Gender Studies, Gender and Leadership, Philosophies of Feminism, African Women in Development, and so on and so forth. But in the year 2017, we realized that there are some key courses, because of emerging issues in the society, that we also need to add to our curriculum. And we had to review our curriculum, and we included men's studies, because we realized that when we are talking, though men's studies as a topic in the course outline, it's there, but it is not elaborately taught. So, and we felt there's a need to, include men's studies, ethical issues in gender, and gender, globalization, and migration, because it's an emerging discourse in scholarship. And we realized that a lot of our students are also interested in that area, and they are doing their own research work there. And looking at, what is the dimension of the researches our students are into. They have done a lot of, and we have, we admit students from different disciplinary background. We have students from Agric, from political science, from law, from English, from religious studies, a lot, because we know gender studies is multidisciplinary in nature. And the research is, our students come up with a very interesting researches. Initially, it was the work-life family, the work-family balance in academics. They're looking at the issue of feminism, wanting to understand what feminism is in that African context. And over time, we see that they are expanding in their research horizon, looking at the issue of migration, looking at the issue of trafficking, baby factory, marital conflict, domestic violence, women in political representation, women in the informal economy, social entrepreneurship, and a lot of contemporary issues in higher education institutions that emanate in the society. So we see that, over the years, we have been expanding, and our knowledge production level also it's on the increase. And though there was a question that just to conclude, because of my time, that why should there be? Is it compulsory that there should be a gender studies? We should have a gender studies center, or it should be included in the. It should be a discipline or a program in this. And we noticed that here in the University of Ibadan, despite the fact that we have a center, the World Women's Research Documentation Center, we have the gender studies program at the postgraduate level, at all levels, and in most departments, we see that there's that touch of gender in some courses. There's a lot of courses in history, in Faculty of Arts, in the sciences, in the social sciences, even in agriculture, that they offer some courses that is gender related. So we see that even at that academic level, that discourse on gender is it's expanding. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Olutayo and Mutiat. Would you like to start? Please, let's try to be brief so we can then ask, we can leave the ground to the audience.
So first Mutiat, I think. Mutiat first?
Yeah, I think she said so.
Okay, please. Yeah.
Well, I thought time was a bit useful. When you
okay.
She wants to start questions.
Because I think there are some other people that,
Okay. In what ways have women's history enhanced knowledge production? Wow. Oh my goodness. Well, I won't say in what ways has women's history enhanced knowledge production per se. How does history benefit the society as a whole? Because women's history is an aspect of history. And so when we are talking about history is the mother of every discipline. For a serious researcher, there's no way a serious researcher is going to work on anything without making reference to what historians have to say. And so on that basis, I will say there's no way we want to talk about disciplinary issues, especially in the humanities and even in the sciences. I've seen several professors of sciences inside the University of Ibadan. In one way or the other, they make references to works of historians, even in their inaugural lectures. So that goes a long way in showing how history is fundamental to every discipline. But of course, how women's history is relevant to the society or to knowledge production specifically is the fact that even in the humanities itself, there is no way you want to look at any disciplinary or issue or any perspective that will not have historians on board to actually verify and validate knowledge across disciplines. For instance, in the Journal of Humanities, I can see in Nigeria, even in Africa and globally, you discover that there is no Journal of Humanities and Social Sciences that will not have historians on board. There is a purpose for that, because there is hardly any discipline that will submit an article to journals of humanities and social sciences that the knowledge, the experience and skills of the historian will not be important, because the historian is needed to actually validate whatever is produced across discipline. So I think that's it.
So my question is the difference between the center I studied and some other gender studies centers. Basically, when you have a center, I think the template is expected to be more or less the same. That is, it's semi-autonomous. There is a director, and there is a lot of bureaucracies. For example, there's a secretary and all of that. So at church, it's about the same thing. My issue is that actually, I think I expected more. Like, for example, if the center, are they awarding certificates, and what is the state of that and all? So the university is a young university, and the postgraduate section is still growing. So that is not being done for now. And one thing I experienced when I went for my first field work in 2018 there was that I think the center also realized the need to actually do better than that. And at that point, there was a professor from the University of Ibadan who was on sabbatical at the center, just to help them grow that center. So I observed that. So like I said in my presentation too, the journal dedicated to the center was published last in 2010. And that shows that perhaps it is not what it should be right now. And that actually called for a restructuring in 2014. So when it's a center in Nigeria, it's there are attributes that are similar. When it's a unit, there are attributes that are similar. When it's just a study group, there are attributes that are similar. So as a center, it's actually more or less the same, just that they have not been like too active like maybe some other centers, maybe perhaps at the federal level. So that's what I observed majorly there. So that's it.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. For me, I have only one question, and because Dr. Olutayo is the coordinator of the gender studies unit, part of which I am, she has answered half of the questions. So I will just say that she was asking about teaching and learning activities in the past and contemporary times, and truly I must say that things have changed. There were issues that were peculiar to the period of Bolanle Awares and the Adedeji days, and each set had issues that they had to deal with. And currently we are reading them up and trying to interpret what they have done in different contexts. So we have issues that are dynamic, and of course we factor in intersectional issues, also. So even when you are looking at it, you look at Nigeria, you have to look at how this particular issue operates or applies to the northern community or to the southern community. So the pedagogy is wider, and more encompassing. And of course, the last point I will make is about theoretical postulations. We are also encouraging that, so not just that you just bring or import a particular theory and marry it to whatever you are doing. We're encouraging our students to also postulate theories. And of course, we have a wide range of courses like Dr. Olutayo have mentioned, and including courses in masculinity studies. So it has changed, and there's a lot, and we are still hoping to improve because things are emerging that are forcing us to improve on what we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Omotoso. So we have one question from the chat, and then I can see Tayo Agundiade, who is raising her hand. So first of all, a question from Arit Oku. So Arit is, sorry? Arit is asking, I believe that there are areas in our recent history that we need to also look at, like the role of women in the recent NSARS movement. Can you throw light on areas or themes in our recent history that have been studied at the recent emerging voices? So maybe we can take also Tayo question and then open up to our speakers.
Hi, I hope I can be heard. Tayo Agunbiade is my name. My interest here is because I have a background in history. I'm not an academic. I'm someone who's just interested in history, and I have done a lot of research, and I went through life as a journalist. I'm trying to find out, and if there is time, I hope there is I'm interested in, you know, all the speakers to sort of give me their insights. I'm trying to find out if someone like me, who is not an academic, now decides to go and do vast amounts of research because she believes that, you know, history should be accessible to everyone. And we live in a country where history was once cut out of the curriculum, but I believe it's now back in. And so someone like me, and I think there are other people like me out there who are researchers and interested in women's history and have gone through so much trouble to go and, you know, gather a lot of material together and put into a book. But because we are not academics, you know, how does the sector accept people like us? You know, are we, you know, are we seen to be part of the community because we have written a book, or we're not part of the community because we don't engage in thematic areas, but we just provide narrative history because we're interested in, you know, our country and the world, so to speak, to have more knowledge about what Nigerian women have done in the past. So I'd really like all the speakers to really, you know, give me an insight into what they think about, you know, people like me. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would you like to answer? Mutiat.
Actually, you need to come. Sorry, you maybe too far from my microphone. There you go.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's something we call public history, and necessarily per se, I see it as a professional aspect of history. And I know in the US, and some of our students even get references to study public history in the US. And what they are meant to do with public history is to interface how history is going to be relevant to the society. And of course, along the line, we tend to see that how commercialized public history has been. And so, I mean, what I'm telling you now is just like what I will tell our undergrads and postgrads who wonder what they want to use with their degree in history, that of course, not all historians will be academic historians, and some historians will actually interface between being academic and public historians anyway. And so we have an aspect of public history that I feel that you should read more about and get to know. And I know you are already doing that already, because I know some of the things you have been doing, and I can classify that as public history. So maybe you read more about public history so that you get a grasp of what you have been doing and how relevant you are. Kudos to you.
No, not instance. Maybe just Tayo. Okay, to Tayo, I think from what I would understand from what you have said, many of the things you have done, they are actually very important for the academia. Like, for example, as a graduate student at the University of Ibadan here, sometimes we engage journalists. Like I remember Edmond Obilo, and even at the Institute of African Studies here, once they spot that what one person is doing is very important. Even if you're not an academia, there are ways in which they are engaged. They are called upon to actually share their wealth of experience, and it benefits students in many ways. So, and in a way, I mean, it could actually be infused into some courses and not like that, if it's very important. Like, for example, there are people who even did not have a formal education, but what they do is very relevant for the academia. There are few people like that, maybe in OAU and all like that, that what they have done, because of what they have done, they were brought into the academia to actually share their experience, and it actually is worthwhile to do that. So whatever you are doing, or all you have done, is actually seen, and it's useful. It's very useful, and I'm sure that schools, especially whenever they see that is actually needed, you can be engaged. Maybe not as a lecturer, but as a resource person, to actually shed more light on the things that you have done. That's the little I think I can say about that. Yeah.
Okay, so I say to the NSAS issue that I can assure you that things are going on. It takes time, for academics to begin to churn out their articles on specific issues, especially when they're burning issues. Before we go through the review stages and all of that, it could take time. But I can assure you that there are pockets of things going on, with regards to studies on NSAS, and you are going to definitely enjoy them. And next, I want to say that Ms. Agumbiade has been with us at WADOC, and she comes, she attends our programs and speaks at our programs from time to time. And I want to say that the fact that you are non-academic does not exclude you from this discourse, because there's a way you provide newer perspectives for us to interrogate. So you look at it from, maybe a different perspective to what an academic will do. And we appreciate that. We duly appreciate it. And each time we need those things, and we are always needed them. So you are always welcome. So you are not out of the circle. Thank you.
Okay, just briefly too, we don't relate, we don't restrict ourselves to people in academics alone, because we know a lot of people out there that are not in academics, they have a wealth of knowledge on issues, contemporary issues. So in a way, we try and engage, we invite such people to meet, if not for COVID, we do call such people to meet with our students and to share that the wealth of knowledge that they have on particular issues that the students will gain from it. Just that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question for the speakers from our virtual audience?
Just, I think you can see in the chat our list of online seminars, in which one of which Mr. Agumbiade gave a talk to us. So you can have a look at her video on this to have a look at her research as well. So that's if you're interested. Anyone else?
Any other question? You can raise your hand. Anna.
Yeah, sorry, I raised my real hand instead of my digital hand. I just wanted to go on a little bit on the question of maybe the links between scholars or academics and journalists, for example. I think we really need each other. And if scholars have any kind of social responsibility, in my opinion, it's that of forging tools which can then be, grasped by everybody. And in return, other people are also, of course, allowed to forge tools that academics or scholars themselves will use. We've seen that with activists, for example, who offer tools to academics. And I think partly the problem, I guess, we've spoken earlier on the gap between gender studies and real lives, experienced by women. Partly, I think the problem is that scholars sometimes experience difficulties in making themselves, understood by the general public, and there can be a gap between, let's say, society or civil society in general and the academia, and in which case journalists, among other people, can be really useful, necessary go-betweens, so to speak, and I'm not saying that to instrumentalize journalists, but I do feel that sometimes it's hard for academics to make their knowledge available to the general public, and I think it's less the case for journalists.
Thank you, Anne, for your comments. Do we have any other question from the public? So Akachi Edzegbo, I'm sorry for the pronunciation of your name. Would you like to ask a question? The microphone, please.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mine is not really a question, it's like a comment. If you allow me to make a comment. Is that okay?
Yes, yes, sure.
I want to say that I've enjoyed myself and I'm glad. I only saw their announcement about this virtual conference or workshop, and I decided to come. And I want to thank all the presenters and then the organizers. I'm very happy. Sarah, I thank you, and all of you. I just want to say also to express my joy when I learned that a book has been edited on the work that Ninamba did. Ninamba was my friend at Unilag. I was at Unilag, retired from there. I'm now in the Southeast teaching in another university. So this kind of thing is very good to promote women who have done a lot of work, especially regarding history, women's history. You know, some of these women, people like Bolanle Awe, for instance, they resurrected the lives of women that were buried. They lost their voices. But these women researchers came, the work they did resurrected the lives of these women. This is what is happening in many parts of the world. And I want to suggest, especially to the center in Ibadan, if you can maybe lead in the area of organizing workshops or conferences so that you can mobilize other gender institutes or centers or even departments where gender studies are taught. If you can mobilize them so that from time to time, we could have a conference where we talk about women. There are, you know, some people may have new theories, new ideas, as somebody was saying. And I really want to thank the French Institute and then IFRA for organizing this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would you like to react, the three speakers?
May I?
Yes, sure.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Good afternoon. I was glad when I looked through the membership of the participants at this workshop, and I was like, "Ooh, wow!" How people like you also found your way into this platform, and we are glad that you are here. Thank you so much. You have given us reasons to go on. We read your works, and you give us reasons to theorize, to postulate, to pragmatize, as the case may be. We are glad for the works that people like you have done, you know, ahead of now. And it is because of those works that gender studies is going on. And I want to say specifically that the center is working. Deji has made a lot of comments about the trends and the issues that we have to face. And so I will just use this platform to, because I don't know who are on the platform, but if you have, you know, interest in gender studies, in gender research, please come along, support us, join us, collaborate with us, partner with us. And I'm speaking this on behalf of the Gender Studies Unit of the University of Ibadan, and of course, the Women's Research and Documentation Center. We have so much to do. We have lots that we want to do. Thank you to IFRA for bringing this up. And we thank IFRA for the support of the past and for what we are doing currently. And I want to say on behalf of everyone, thank you, Prof. All the people who have given us reasons to write and to keep researching, and you are one of them. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Do we have other questions, or can we conclude? Okay. So I thank again the three speakers, the two discussants, and the GIS genre and the IFRA-Nigeria for organizing the seminar. I think all of you have the emails of the speakers and the discussants. So if you have any questions and you would like to continue the discussion, don't hesitate to contact the speakers, the discussants, or also IFRA-Nigeria or the French Institute. So now I leave the floor to Marième to maybe some announcements for the next seminars of the institutes.
Thank you, Sara, and thank you to all of you. It was very interesting, stimulating discussion presentation. So we are happy to have organized this with IFRA. Really, thank you, Sara and Vincent, for the organization. And I just want to add an information that we will have a new seminar online very soon on February the 22nd. Same schedule, 3 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. And this session will be co-organized with IFEAC, the French Institute for Central Asian Studies, and it will be about why and how use post-decolonial and feminist theories on and in Central Asia. So if you are interested, feel free to come to this seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to do a vote of thanks, like in Nigeria. Thank you to all the speakers. It was great. It was really great. Thank you to the Institut du Genre in France. Really, it was great partnering with you on this occasion. And I really enjoyed myself. I learned so many things. And thank you all, really. So thank you online. Thank you to the audience as well. Much appreciated. Mrs. Reflé organized this, so I'd like to thank her as well. I'd like to remind everyone that this session was recorded and should be available on our website, on our YouTube channel pretty soon. So yeah, you can share it after that. Thank you, everyone. The chat as well should be saved. If you haven't got the references, I think you can save the chat, the content of the chat. Yeah. So you have access to the references shared there as well. So thank you, everyone.